Hi, everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is January the 30th, 2025. I'm Barry Stagner. And first of all, before we jump in, thanks so much for all who prayed for us. And it was great to meet some of you who watched the lineup on the cruise this past or week before that we had in the Caribbean. Just a great time teaching through Daniel and Revelation and meeting so many people. We had some 750 people on the ship and met once and sometimes twice a day to teach through in 10 sessions the whole book of Daniel and the whole book of Revelation, and just had a great time. So thanks for all who prayed, and great, as I said, to meet some of you. And also I always love hearing about the Louis fans out there, the most famous dog in the world. And many people said, say hi to Louis for me. So but great to be back with you this week. And also, let me remind you that this weekend at 9 a.m. Pacific time and on YouTube, and if you're watching on YouTube, you can make sure you hit the subscribe bell there so you get a notification Saturday. We'll have our annual proximity conference, myself and Amir, Pastor Michael Lay, and Pastor Jack Hibbs. We're going to be teaching throughout the day, and then we'll round out the day with a Q&A session, which is always one of the highlights excuse me, of any of these conferences that we have. So I encourage you to tune in. And of course, it'll be archived afterwards. And we're going to run it exclusively through my YouTube channel this time. And so just make sure you're subscribed. And if you're watching on Facebook right now, just go to YouTube and type in my name, and it'll get you to the right channel. And you can join us on Saturday or afterwards if you're able to watch it later. Well, what a week. And of course, we're all heartbroken over the tragedy, the collision of a U.S. Apache helicopter with a commuter plane in Washington, D.C., outside of Ronald Reagan Airport, and the crash into the Potomac, and the significant loss of life. And we obviously need to be praying for the families that are affected by this. And just a difficult time. You know, the fires in California. And my son sent me a text this morning. He's up with Samaritan's Purse and Pastor Jack up at the fire line in Altadena, or the aftermath, I should say. Thank the Lord we had some rain this past weekend, 3 or 4 days, and where it rained, not super heavy, but pretty steady, and there were some stronger cloud that ran through the state and put the fires out and all that stuff. So we're grateful for that. But now comes the aftermath, and of course, as always here in California, you know, the talk is already about what's going to happen when the heavy rains hit. Should we have them again this year? And remember, we had a record rainfall last year. And so it's very possible that this could lead to further trauma for the area with mudslides and all that that happened. But, you know, someday we're going to be in a place that is absolutely perfect. And there's nothing, no weather anomalies, no heat waves, no fire season, just the peace that only Jesus can bring. And we'll be there in that beautiful city, that 1,500 mile square cube known as the New Jerusalem. And we'll be there forever and ever. And I would say amen to that. Well, let's get on with our stories here this evening. The Jewish News Syndicate reports that Arbel Yehud, Agam, Berger, and Gadi, Mozes are home after 482 days in captivity. And, you know, while we were on the cruise, the first of the releases took place, and we had been praying for, and we're going to continue with the 42 days of prayer that was initiated on the cruise, and have Pastor Mike Golay lead us in that, as he so wonderfully did throughout the cruise. And, it was just, I think so many of us were moved. And if you watch the Q&A on Monday that Amir and I did with Pastor Mike, you'll recall that, Amir got a text during the program where the names of the living and the dead hostages were released. And it was a very emotional moment. And, and the loss of a loved one obviously is tragic and something you'll carry with you for the rest of your life. But, the thing I think that was just so overwhelming to us, and a couple of us talked about it on the cruise, and that was that these young women, especially, their lives are forever changed. They will be dealing with the memories of the things that happened to them and the heinous atrocities that were committed against them and the violation of their bodies and all these other things. Those are things you can't shake, and even when, the Lord has touched us and healed us and forgiven us of our sins. A lot of the things still continue in life, and the memories of them, and it's just a tough season ahead for these girls, and all of them. And there's a release of an 80-year-old uh, Gadi Mozes this past or yesterday, I guess, was the actual release. And what a traumatic thing! 482 days in captivity for an 80-year-old man. And boy, talk about just demonic uh, inspired people and just these heinous things. There was some very serious concerns and legitimate concerns that the released hostages were even going to make it to the Red Cross vehicles to usher them out of the Gaza Strip and back into Israel. And there was some threats of getting lynched on the way out. And this wasn't Hamas that was reacting that way. That was the regular citizens of Gaza, the Palestinians, and just terrible time and season in Israel's history. But the Bible said they're going to take center stage in the last days, and here we are with the world largely gathered against him, as Zechariah 12:3 prophesies, and that just tells us we are moving closer and closer to that moment and the twinkling of an eye experience that we are all longing for and looking forward to. 3 Israelis and 5 Thais were released from terrorist captivity in the Gaza Strip on Thursday as part of Hamas's truce with Jerusalem, 482 days after they were taken captive during the October 7, 2023 massacre. Israeli citizens Arbel Yehud, Gadi Mozes, 80, Arbel is 29, were handed over by Hamas to representatives of the International Committee of the Red Cross on Thursday afternoon in the southern city of Khan Yunis. Southern Gaza City, I should say. Moses was taken from his home in kibbutz near Oz, alongside his wife Margalit, who was one of the first captives released in the 2023 truce. The 5 released Thais, all foreign workers who were taken hostage on October 7th during the cross-border assault, were named by the Israeli Defense Forces as Tayana Pongsak, Sathian Suwanakan. Just huge, interesting names here, and I won't go through them and embarrass myself in an effort to pronounce them. But the 5 Thai workers, foreign workers, were also abducted and held throughout all this time. They were Jews. And again, that just tells you something about the mentality of Hamas and the demonic influence that is being had over them. And according to information provided by the Red Cross, 7 hostages, including an Israeli male and female hostage and 5 foreign nationals, were handed over to it and are making their way to the IDF and Israeli Security Agency forces in the Gaza Strip. And I'm sure that since this article was written, we've all watched some of the footage of the reuniting with family and things of that nature. And again, just a powerfully emotional time. And Amir and I had a conversation some time ago, and he was mentioning that, should some of these that are returning in coffins be among the toddlers and infants that were abducted, this is going to have a heavy impact on Israeli citizenry. And, it's interesting that Hamas would choose not to release them first. I think they're quite aware of what the potential response is going to be from Israel should they further show their demonic colors and have harmed these young children worse than simply abducting them and taking them away from the family and potentially killing them. Agam Berger, accompanied by IDF and Israeli security forces, recently crossed the border into the territory of the state of Israel. The military stated she was reunited with her family at a reception point near the border and evacuated to a hospital. Thank God we have reached this moment, and our heroine Agam has returned to us after 482 days in the hands of the enemy, the family said in a statement after the reunion. Our girl is strong, believing, and brave. They went on to say, we'd like to thank the security forces and the entire people of Israel for all the support and prayers, added the family's statement. So again, much to be thankful for, and yet there's more hardship and difficulty coming for the nation as this 42-day release process continues. And, there's already been difficulties, and, they're making demands of the release of all these terrorists and murderers in exchange for just a sprinkling, if you will, of Israeli hostages in return for hundreds, and demands for those who have caused great harm to the nation of Israel for them to be released. Now, the only reason for that is so they can come and lead the way, lead the charge, so to speak, against the nation of Israel once again. And I want to talk a little bit in a few moments about, some of the things that are being said today, and some of the things, especially I think, that have been propagated through, our university system, and some of the misinformation that's been communicated to our young adults at the university level by those who I'm not sure what their agenda would be, other than, just being spiritually destitute and hating the Jews just because they're Jews. And that's been present regarding the nation of Israel since their inception, all the way back to the Egyptian captivity. The European Conservative reports that Israeli hostages say they were hidden in a UN shelter. After a string of scandals, will it finally be the end of the line for the UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, for Palestinian refugees, now that the Israeli hostages have claimed they were held in one of its refugee camps? Israel's Channel 13 reported on Wednesday that during their 471 days in captivity, which ended in the gift of terrorist branding goodie bags, Emily Damari, Romy Gonen, and Doron Steinbrecher, 31, were hidden for part of the time in UN shelters. And the terrorists took advantage of the UN camps to house the kidnapped women there, knowing that the Israeli Defense Forces would not attack the compound, thereby providing security for themselves as well. UNRWA, some of those whose staff were reportedly involved in the October 7th pogrom, were now meet regularly with Hamas terrorists, run 8 such camps in Gaza, and yet it's not clear which were, if not are, used to hold Israeli hostages. Richard Goldberg, who is senior advisor to the Washington Pro-Israeli Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, said the revelation means we need to stop thinking about UNRWA as merely a supporter of Hamas and start internalizing the extent to which the agency is a front for Hamas. American-Israeli journalist Emily Schrader added that this should tell you indisputably what UNRWA really does in Gaza. They assist Hamas. And the news came just one day after the British government, which has handed millions of pounds of taxpayer cash to the UN agency, urged Israel not to endanger UNRWA's ability to operate. And the mood could not be more different in Washington when newly inaugurated President Donald Trump halted funding to UNRWA, among other foreign assistance programs, on his first day in office. And Elise Stefanik, his pick for U.S. ambassador to the UN, has bashed the organization as a den of anti-Semitism. And when they have resolution after resolution against the nation of Israel and nothing against China, Iran, or Cuba, or any other places where there are human tragedies and the violation of human rights taking place, pretty much says it all. And I think that's why they bear the moniker in Israel of the United Nothing. Now, Al Jazeera reports that we will suffocate Palestinian refugees in Gaza fear because of the UNRWA ban. Now, with the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees ordered to cease operations in Israel and the occupied territory on Thursday, many Palestinians dread the implications on their lives and future. For the duration of Israel's 15-month war on Gaza, which has uprooted most of its population and reduced most of the enclave to rubble, UNRWA was a critical lifeline of support for the 2.3 million stranded Palestinians, even as humanitarian supplies dwindled. Humanitarian supplies didn't dwindle. Remember, this is Al Jazeera reporting, and one of their claims is to fair reporting. The humanitarian supplies didn't dwindle. Hamas took them and let them rot. Some of the meals ready to eat that were shipped across the border for the everyday Palestinian were simply taken by Hamas and allowed to rot inside the back of a truck, or they were selling them at astronomically high prices to the citizenry in order to gain a profit and to line their coffers, so to speak. And besides UNRWA's critical humanitarian role, Refugees, who account for 71% of Gaza's population, fear they will be left without a link to their families' original homes or a right to ever return to the land that was once historic Palestine and is now Israel. Since its creation in 1949 to serve and handle the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians forcibly displaced by Israel's creation a year after UNRWA's uh, a year earlier, UNRWA had symbolized the hope of refugees to return home. This is what I want to talk to you about in a moment, so just stick with me. And sitting in front of the remnants of his destroyed home in Khan Yunis, 74-year-old Abu Nael Hamouda describes UNRWA as a lifeline across generations, one that has provided education, healthcare, and food in times of peace and war alike. UNRWA is the lung that the Palestinian refugees breathe from, says Hamouda, who originally hails from what was once Palestinian town of Majdal and was forced to evacuate from Majdal as a child as it became part of Ashkelon in Israel. Without it, we would suffocate. My children and grandchildren went to UNRWA schools, and we were treated in UNRWA hospitals, and it helped us put roofs over our heads. In October 2024, the Israeli Knesset passed two laws, one designating UNRWA as a so-called terrorist organization and the other banning it from operating in Gaza and the occupied West Bank. And, we hear this kind of language. And, of course, this article, again, is from Al Jazeera. So it's going to have that tainted perspective on the reality of what has taken place in the language of occupied territories and, them being forcibly removed from their homes and all of that. The reality is simply this. And this, I've mentioned to you, the Jewish Virtual Library in the past, a great resource for all things historical regarding both ancient Israel and modern Israel. And what is reported there, which is actually true, is that the Palestinians left their homes in 1947 to 49 for a variety of reasons. They left their homes. They weren't forcibly removed. Thousands of wealthy Arabs left in anticipation of a war. Now remember, Israel was invaded by 5 nations on the same day it declared statehood. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and yet, because God is for them and has not abandoned them and cast them off, nor has he replaced them with the church. The Israelis were victorious over 5 major Arab nations with full weaponry and artillery and all the other things associated with warfare, and Israel had nothing, and yet they won. Thousands of wealthy Arabs were told left in anticipation of a war. Thousands more responded to the Arab leaders' calls to get out of the way of the advancing armies. A handful were expelled, but most simply fled to avoid being caught in the crossfire of a battle. Many Arabs claim that 800,000 to 1 million Palestinians became refugees in 47 to 49, and the last census was taken by the British in 1945, and it found approximately 1.2 million permanent Arab residents in all of Palestine. A 1949 government of Israel census counted 160,000 Arabs living in the country after the war. In 1947, a total of 809,100 Arabs lived in the same area, and this meant no more than 650,000 Palestinian Arabs could have become refugees. A report by the UN mediator on Palestine arrived at an even lower figure of 472,000 and calculated that only about 360,000 Arab refugees required aid. Although much is heard about the plight of the Palestinian refugees, little is said about the Jews who fled from Arab states. Their situation had long been precarious. During the 1947 UN debates, Arab leaders threatened them. For example, Egypt's delegate told the General Assembly the lives of 1 million Jews in Muslim countries would be jeopardized by partition. The number of Jews fleeing Arab countries for Israel in the years following Israel's independence was double the number of Arabs leaving Palestine. Many Jews were allowed to take little more than the shirts on their backs, and these refugees had no desire to be repatriated, and little is heard about them because they did not remain refugees for long. Out of the 820,000 Jewish refugees from 1948 to 72, 586,000 were resettled in Israel at great expense and without any offer of compensation from the Arab governments who confiscated their possessions. That's actually the truth about what happened. And as they mentioned, there had been some who had been expelled, but there were just a few. But the reality is that they fled. Many of them fled, one, for protection of their own assets, some not to get caught in the crossfire of war, and others because the Arab nations told them, get out of the way for your own safety because we're going to wipe Israel out. Now, I don't know that I'd be all that anxious to have that kind of person for my neighbor who moved away so I could be killed and welcome them back. So once again, all this rhetoric that we hear coming from, the woke left and all those bleeding heart liberals, as they're often called, just simply ignore what is factual and what is true. But that's part of what the Bible talks about is going to take place in the last days. People will be prepared to believe the lie of the Antichrist. And so it's going to be an age of precursors to such things where lies are predominant from the lips of many politicians and others around the world. This is what I'm going to talk about on Saturday, what's called the apostasia, or some say the apostasia, and the falling away. It's the defection from truth. I'm going to talk about that both spiritually and globally in my time as we open up the Proximity Conference on Saturday, which again, 9 a.m. Pacific time. Make sure you log on to YouTube. All Israel News says Hamas can never govern Gaza or threaten Israel again, according to U.S. Secretary of State Rubio in a conversation with the Egyptian foreign minister. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke with the Egyptian foreign minister Badr Abdelati on Tuesday, emphasizing the importance of close cooperation to ensure Hamas cannot govern the Gaza Strip again. And according to State Department spokesman Tammy Bruce, Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke with Egyptian Foreign Minister Abdelati today to discuss the latest developments in Gaza. The Secretary thanked the Foreign Minister for Egypt's mediation efforts in securing the release of hostages and the ceasefire, as well as continuing humanitarian assistance deliveries throughout Gaza. He also reinforced the importance of holding Hamas accountable, and the Secretary reiterated the importance of close cooperation to advance post-conflict planning to ensure Hamas can never govern Gaza or threaten Israel again. And I think many of those in the nation of Israel would tell you that Gaza is Hamas and Hamas is Gaza. And, watching some of the things and some of the footage where, these who were being released by Hamas were nearly killed, grabbed and lynched by everyday Palestinians because of their hatred for the Jews, because that's what they're taught to believe. And again, just watching these things unfold, reading some of these media stories, it's very frustrating to see just the spiritual blindness that so many have in our world today. But thank you, Lord, that we are not of the night, but we are of the day. We are not in the darkness about these things, as the Bible clearly tells us. Moving on, the Times of Israel reports that the White House Biden allotted $50 million for Gaza condoms, and an ex-Biden official denies this feverish dream. The White House claimed Tuesday that the Biden administration earmarked $50 million for a condom distribution program in the Gaza Strip, but does not offer evidence to back up the claim, which a former senior official dismisses as a feverish dream. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt highlighted the figure to justify a sweeping freeze that the Trump administration instituted last week on almost all U.S. foreign aid. She said the expenditure was discovered in U.S. President Donald Trump's first week, including by the new Department of Government Efficiency led by tech billionaire Elon Musk, who on X called it the, quote, tip of the iceberg, end quote. Musk's Doge initiative, Department of Government Efficiency, and the Budget Office found that there was about 50 million taxpayer dollars that went out the door to fund condoms in Gaza, Leavitt tells her debut press conference. This is a preposterous waste of taxpayer money. Now, we just read in a previous article that there's some 2.3 million Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip. Now, we know just because of the general birth rate, that bounces between 49 and 51% man to woman ratio. So let's just split that and call it 50% of that 2.3 million are men. And how many of those are not of a reproductive capability age is anybody's guess, but let's say that half of that 1.15 million is children. And so that leaves, you know, well under a million. And I couldn't hazard even a wild guess as to what the cost of a condom is, but let's say that it's $5 each. Well, that's 10 million condoms. What do 600 and some odd thousand men need 10 million condoms for? And I, as much as it grieves me to say it, I think that this was actually a funding for the efforts of Hamas and all that. We know that the previous administration was not Israel friendly, just like the other um, event, administration that Biden was a part of. Sorry, I've got a text coming in. I was reading that, and kind of like a lizard, I got eyes going in two different directions. But Andrew Miller, who served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Israeli-Palestinian Affairs under former President Joe Biden, called the claim outlandish. It's possible the $50 million is put aside for sexual health or something of that nature, which would include gynecology and many other services, but definitely not condoms alone, he told the Times of Israel. And the U.S. Agency for International Development's spending on injectable contraceptives, contraceptive implants, IUDs, male condoms, oral contraceptives, standard days method, and female condoms amounted to $60 million in the fiscal year of 2023. And that was way across the entire globe. Moreover, no condoms went to the Middle East. And the only country to receive a small amount, $45,000 in other contraceptives, was Jordan. And this, again, according to someone who was part of the Biden administration. So, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in a memo on Friday, said the United States was freezing nearly all aid disbursement except for emergency food and military aid to Egypt and Israel. And Leavitt also said the U.S. was about to dispense $37 million to the World Health Organization before Trump announced a pullout from the UN body. U.S. Secretary General Antonio Guterres voiced concern about the aid freeze by the United States, along the world's largest provider of development assistance in absolute dollar terms. Shortly after Leavitt's press conference, a federal judge on Tuesday afternoon temporarily blocked part of the Trump administration's foreign aid freeze and the short-term pause issued by U.S. District Judge Lauren L. Ali Khan prevents the Trump admin from advancing its directive to freeze grants that were already approved by the federal government through at least 5 p.m. on Monday. Well, thankfully we have a new component of the government, and that is, watchdogs over government efficiency. And, that's one of the things I think that, Trump kicks up a lot of dust in people's emotions and minds. And, he's one of those love him or hate him kind of guys. And, but the reality is with those who he has surrounded himself with and put in positions of power and oversight, not too bad to have a businessman who knows how to operate a business in such a place and knows how to cut waste. And that's one of the primary features of operating a business is cutting waste, eliminating unnecessary expenditures and streamlining production and all these other things. And those who own businesses, are probably more adept at that than those who make a living as a politician lining their pockets from big pharma and others. Now, we've had some interesting weather of late, and I think most of us saw, I believe it was down in Pensacola, Florida, 6 inches of snow, which is obviously unusual for Florida. When we were there a couple of weeks ago, Amir and I were in Inverness, Florida. They were talking about how cold it was, and it was unusually cold for them. It was in the mid 40s. Again, we're seeing that kind of thing. When I went out the other morning, yesterday morning it was, to walk Louis here in SoCal, it's 37 degrees, which for us is unusual. It's not unheard of, but it is unusual. So there are weather anomalies. We're seeing this catastrophic flooding happening all over the world. And, the climate crowd is reporting 450 straight days of record heat levels in the oceans around the world. and all of that. But I'm sure many of you have probably seen the clip from the founder of the Weather Channel, who rather comically was dealing with a CNN reporter, telling him that the climate change deal is nothing but a hoax, and it's a bunch of nonsense that's meant to redistribute wealth and all the other things that I think most of us are quite aware of. The climate does change, and it always has changed. And one of the things that I saw with a climatologist report on just last week, he was talking about the CO2 levels, which, that's the catastrophe that's looming out there. But he said we are actually in a CO2 drought. We are in low levels of CO2 right now that are approaching a dangerous low. And we've got so many things that CO2 that are dependent, I should say, on CO2, and yet here we are trying to reduce levels when we're already at drought levels. And one of the things I think that, and I bring this up often, and I know it, but I think it's interesting that the sun in Revelation 16 is going to scorch men's bodies. I personally believe that is, it's not the sun being a supernova or anything like that. That would melt the planet and all the planets in our solar system, but rather it's a coronal mass ejection, or what sometimes called a solar flare. And space.com says a 500,000-mile wide hole in the sun's atmosphere is aiming an aurora sparking solar wind at the Earth. A colossal coronal hole, nearly 500,000 miles or 800,000 kilometers for those who are under that system, has opened in the sun's atmosphere, spewing fast-moving solar wind toward the Earth. Coronal holes are regions where the sun's magnetic fields have opened up, allowing a solar wind to escape freely into space, according to spaceweather.com. And these areas appear darker in ultraviolet images because the hot, glowing gases typically trapped within the magnetic fields are no longer contained, instead stream outward into space. The solar wind escaping from this coronal hole, the diameter of which measures over 62 times that of the diameter of the Earth, is moving at speeds of more than 310 miles per second, according to spaceweather.com. And this flow is expected to reach Earth by tomorrow, January 31st, where it could spark minor geomagnetic storm conditions, or a class G1. While these storms are not severe, they can intensify auroral displays. And the rating system for coronal mass ejections is G1 to G5. And I believe there's going to be a G5 in Revelation 16. And the magnetosphere of the Earth is likely going to be damaged or broken down completely, allowing these radioactive ions to bombard the Earth and scorch men's bodies. And I think that's most likely because, these coronal mass ejections and the solar wind that comes from that are temporary. And that's exactly what happens during Revelation 16. And the sun being powered to give the power to scorch men's bodies is only temporary. So it makes sense that that's what that would be, and nothing's permanent happening with the sun at that point in time. But very likely on the rating scale, not a G1, but probably a G5 during the tribulation period. But you think about the size of this. This is 62 times that of the diameter of the Earth, 500,000 miles wide. It reminds us how big the sun is, for one thing. And the story goes on to talk about exactly how these coronal mass ejections take place and all those other things. But, the sun can do something. And again, this just popped up, just happened, and the solar wind's going to hit tomorrow. So during the tribulation period, just out of nowhere, there's going to be most likely a G5 geomagnetic storm. And one of the other interesting things is that it will disable everything electronic when it hits the world. So that's and there's many articles out there about the potential of that happening, especially in this world. How there was an event back in, I think it was in 1859, where telegraph lines blew up. Telegraph operators were shocked, and there's a major interruption in telegraph service for a time. But we live in a different world now. Everything is electronic. Can you imagine? I mean, think about people today when they can't find their phone, and the panic, and all these other things. We are dependent upon these devices and electronically charged technology, from cash registers to gas pumps and all that. Imagine all of that being disabled. And that's what a G5 magnetic storm would do. So just want to keep that in your thinking. It's coming. And by the way, we won't be here to see it. We will be with the Lord. And it's a prophetic necessity that the church be removed before the lawless one could be revealed. And, like I said, on Saturday, I'm going to talk about this in detail. But the defection from truth comes first, and then the lawless one will be revealed, because he's going to tell a huge lie that the world has to believe or is going to believe, and they're being prepped for it now by all the lies that we're told these days. Now, here's another interesting story, and it comes from Watchers. It says the Doomsday Clock is now set at 89 seconds to midnight amidst rising threats of nuclear war, get this, and artificial intelligence. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists Science and Security Board, SASB, set the Doomsday Clock at 89 seconds to midnight on January 28th, 2025, or 2 days ago. This marks the closest it's been to midnight in its 78-year history. So the Doomsday Clock, did you catch that, is closer than it's ever been in the 78 years they've been setting this time. The change coincides with the beginning of a new U.S. presidential term, rapid advancements in our artificial intelligence, and increasing dysfunction in the global information ecosystem, undermining society's ability to address complex challenges. The decision is based on multiple factors. The Russia-Ukraine war has entered its third year, while conflicts in the Middle East continue to pose a risk of escalation. Russia has suspended compliance with the New START treaty and withdrawn ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Meanwhile, China is rapidly expanding its nuclear arsenal, and the U.S. has stepped back from its traditional role as a moderating influence. According to SASB, these factors have significantly increased the risk of nuclear war, and that's what the clock is set to. We're 89 seconds, as far as this figurative clock says, away from a potential nuclear war, global in scale. SASB has also raised concerns about rapid advancement in AI and its integration into various sectors. In particular, the military applications of AI and the development of autonomous weapons pose significant risks. The emergence and resurgence of diseases continue to threaten the global economy, society, and security. The off-season appearance and sustained presence of highly pathogenic avian influenza, or HPAI, its spread to farm animals and dairy products, and confirmed human cases have raised concerns about the potential for a severe human pandemic. The last adjustment to the Doomsday Clock occurred in 2022 when SASB set it to 90 seconds to midnight following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The clock was initially set at 7 minutes to midnight when it was created by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists in 1947. So, slow but sure, we are moving toward that moment in time. I should say the world is. Now, one of the things I think that we need to recognize, there's many signs given to us concerning the last days and what we ought to be looking for that would identify them as such. Hebrews very clearly says, in time past, God spoke to the fathers through the prophets, but in these last days has spoken to us in his Son. So Jesus coming into the world ushered in a season known as the last days, and we're at I believe, the last of the last days in the time in which we now live. Now, listen to this article on the ridiculousness and the thinking of many, and this comes from the Post-Millennial. Democrats in the Washington legislature are planning to tax cow flatulence. Yeah, that's right. They're planning to tax cow flatulence. You're asking the growers to pay more taxes, more regulation in a time where you have record low commodity prices and their costs are astronomical right now. It's just wrong. Now, House Bill 1630 would require feedlots and dairy farms to report the annual metric tons of methane emitted by cows in the preceding calendar year. If the methane exceeds CO2 limits, those facilities could become regulated under the state's controversial Climate Commitment Act, and the same law that spiked gas prices in Washington state. Did you catch that? they could become regulated by the government or a government takeover if the methane levels emitted from cows passing gas is too high. I wonder exactly how you measure that and how you store that so you can add it all up. And HB 1630 would require dairy farms and feedlots to report the annual metric tons of methane emitted. And again, this Climate Commitment Act is the same that spiked gas prices previously in Washington state. And Colfax Republican Representative Joe Schmidt called the bill an unreasonable attack on agriculture and told Washington House Republican radio if they find that there were sufficient methane equivalent to 25,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions, these facilities would likely come under the Climate Commitment Act of covered entities, Schmidt added. You're asking the growers to pay more taxes, as we read at the outset, more regulation at a time where you have record low commodity prices and their costs are astronomical right now. It is just wrong. The cow methane bill is awaiting a public hearing in the House Environment and Energy Committee. It was primarily sponsored by Representative Lisa Parsley, who was joined by her fellow Democrat reps Davina Dewar, Joe Fitzgibbon, Liz Berry, Alex Rommel, Julia Reed, Cindy Ryu, RYU, not sure how you pronounce that, and Natasha Hill. Now, if you live in Washington State, write those names down. Don't vote for them. I mean, this is just nuts, the things that are going on in our world. And, people have lost their minds. There's no question about that. The things that are just unbelievably ridiculous that are promoted. And, I mean, I don't even want to go on this story. It just makes me sick how dumb it is. Now, Breitbart, I don't know if any of you caught the confirmation hearing of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And Breitbart reports that Democrat critics of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. are on the big pharma healthcare dole for millions of dollars. And during Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s confirmation hearing on Wednesday, Senate Democrats criticized the healthcare nominee for chasing money and influence while they have received millions of dollars from the healthcare industry. Senator Ron Wyden said that Kennedy, who Trump nominated to as Health and Human Services Department Secretary, is someone who chases money and influence wherever they lead, even if that may mean the tragic death of children and other vulnerable people. Although Wyden attacked Kennedy for allegedly chasing money and influence, it appears that Wyden has raised significant sums from the healthcare industry, which has a vested stake in the potential confirmation of Kennedy. In the 5 years between 2019 and 24, Wyden has received sums to his campaign committee and his leadership PAC. They include $750,000 from healthcare professionals, $540,000 from health services and health maintenance organizations, or HMOs, $502,000 from pharmaceutical companies, $376,000 from hospitals and nursing homes. You're asking me not to sue drug companies, and I'm not going to agree to that subject, Kennedy said in response to Senator Elizabeth Warren's questioning. Warren went on a rant after her questioning of Kennedy, claiming that if confirmed, he could bankrupt vaccine manufacturers. And Representative Nancy Mace, a Republican from South Carolina, on Wednesday, pointed out that Warren received over $5 million from the healthcare industry during her Democrat presidential primary run. This includes $2.366 million from healthcare professionals, $1.6 million from hospitals and nursing homes, $645,000 from miscellaneous healthcare donations, $625,000 from pharmaceuticals and healthcare product industries, and $598,000 from health services. And in similar fashion to Wyden, health professionals are the fourth largest industry to donate to Warren's campaign committee and her leadership PAC over the last 5 years. The Massachusetts senator has received $489,000 from health professionals, $126 from pharmaceutical companies, and $109 from hospitals and nursing homes. And during his confirmation, Kennedy said he hopes to end the chronic disease epidemic, which is the crux of his Make Healthy America Again movement, or MAHA. He has also sharply criticized the malignant influence of healthcare companies, which he believes has made America more sick. And President Trump has asked me to end the chronic disease epidemic and make America healthy again, he said. If we don't solve chronic disease, Senator, of all other disputes we have about who's paying and whether it's insurance companies, whether it's providers, whether it's HMOs, whether it's patients or families, all those are moving deck chairs around on the Titanic, he said. We have the highest chronic disease burden of any country in the world, the nominee said. Now, I think many of us have probably seen online the fact that 40 years ago, there was no such thing as Alzheimer's. And, all of these statin drugs and the reducing of cholesterol, which is a protective covering around the brain, which is comprised 100% of cholesterol, has appeared all of a sudden on the scene because people don't have the protection necessary to guard their brain from the degrading that happens, the physical degradation that happens via Alzheimer's and other um, diseases of that nature. So, once again, we live in a world that is corrupt, just like it was in the days of Noah. And Genesis tells us that all the world was corrupt before God, and we see corruption on levels that are unprecedented happening. And people basically making a living off of being in governmental office. And just an FYI, when someone was sworn into Congress initially under the founding fathers, they didn't get paid. They had to earn their own living, and they certainly weren't professional politicians. They went during specific sessions and met and made decisions, and then went back to their lives and had a job and families and farms and all those other things. But today, how people come into office, this has often been called into question, how they come into office, basically, you know, with 130,000, 140 or whatever the salary is these days, annual salary, and yet they leave Congress as millionaires, having 10, 15, 20, $30 million in their coffers. And well, that's from payouts. There's just no question about it. We live in a society where, there's a huge portion of our country that don't care. And as long as they get things done the way they want them done, they don't care that people are doing things that are violations of the law or don't have the best interest of the citizenry at heart. And this is just the age in which we live. Aren't you glad to know Jesus is coming soon? Now, that's about it for today. And I just wanted to throw one more thing at you. And just because you watch the lineup, you're going to be the first to know this. And this just basically came down last night, at least as far as the graphic I'm about to show you. And that is this. December 1st, 2025, Amir and I are going to be publishing a devotional. It's already written. It's in editing right now. The cover design just came out yesterday. We're publishing a devotional called Until He Comes. 365 devotions as we await his return. Now, one of the things about this is it's going to be the first devotional that focuses heavily on the nation of Israel. And they're taken from the Bible Bites that are published every week that we started all the way back in 2018. I'm sorry, I got this tickle thing going on again. Travel means cold. And, it's interesting because my wife and I both caught, and we've been talking about, how long it's been, just a common cold. And haven't had one of those in a long, long time. But we're both kind of at the tail end of that. So pardon my brief coughing spells. But anyway, please be praying for that. And again, December 1, 2025, Until He Comes, will be released, and you'll be hearing more about that in the future. And also because you're watching here on on the lineup, Amir has posted his schedule. We asked him not to throw anything up about what I'm about to tell you, just because we don't have the wherewithal to seat everybody who would come. But Sunday night, Pastor Michael Lay at Calvary Central OC. Sunday morning, Pastor Mike is going to be teaching. I've asked him, since he's going to be in the area. Mike's a great Bible teacher. He's going to be teaching. And then 6 p.m. this Sunday night, February 2nd, Amir and I are going to sit down at Calvary Central OC and discuss world events as they relate to Bible prophecies. So I encourage you to tune in for that. If you're in the area, come join us. And again, we're not blasting that out all over social media because we do have limited seating. So anyway, that's it for this week. And thank you for the prayers over this past couple of weeks. We had a great time, a lot of hard work, a lot of long days teaching and getting ready and doing all those things. But, you know, there are worse places to teach the Bible than in the Caribbean, I have to tell you. But we're so thankful to get to meet so many people. And we actually do what's called a meet and greet. And if people want a picture, they can get a picture, sign a book or whatever. But I think we pretty much met everybody on the ship, and people come through in 200 and some odd number groups. And Amir and I get a chance to chat with each of them very briefly, obviously. And but it's just a great time. So anyway, thanks for the prayers. And remember, this Saturday, Proximity 2025, 9 a.m. Pacific time, go to my YouTube channel. Just type in my name. The channel is named The Truth About God, and I think there's a / my name there. But whatever you do, if you type in my name, you're going to get there. And then you can join us either during or after the fact and look forward to everything that God has to say. And again, myself, Amir, Pastor Michael A., and Pastor Jack Hibbs are going to be teaching. And then I believe it's at 3:30. We're going to be doing a Q&A together. So, and all four of us will be answering questions. So anyway, that's it for this week. And interesting to hear some of the comments. A couple of ladies on the cruise showed me their shirts. They said these are our here, there, or in the air shirts. I thought that was classic. So anyway.